If you're into landscape photography and you'd like to improve your sense of composition, light, design, and the ideas side of landscape photography, stay tuned. So I'd like to describe all the considerations that unfold as you go through the process of looking for photographs. And it all begins with inspiration, being somewhere that you love to be and are excited about being, for me at least. And that process begins with what catches your eye when you're actually looking for a single individual picture. Spring in England is beautiful, everything's coming back to life, but it can also be very green. So the bluebells here provide a wonderful contrast. All landscape photographers, if they don't already, should spend time with their subjects, and I certainly always try to do that, exploring it from many angles, looking around and getting immersed in it. And I mean that metaphorically and literally, because I'm going to go and have a look from the perspective of the river, which I think will make a very interesting combination of elements with the trees and the bluebells beyond. So the rain is coming and going, and that's providing something special as well at the moment. And I've spent 15 to 20 minutes looking at this, adjusting the tripod very slightly, looking at the shapes of the rocks and the shapes of the cascades, trying to establish a feeling of connection between the shapes in the water and the shape of the trees with the bluebells beneath them. There's a wonderful feeling of experimentation as well with a situation like this. And the light itself is very critical, but rather than talk, let me just take a photo and you can have a look at it. So that was just the most amazing session there, because we were working away and then the rain got really heavy, and given the fact that the rain was so heavy, you definitely don't want to be taking a lens off, changing lenses. So the 24 to 70 really came into its own at that point, because I needed a longer focal length. The rain got heavier and heavier. The polarizer was great having it on. It just helped me control the reflections. And it's such a simple picture, but the rain makes it, because it softens the background. It creates much more mystery and mood in the color and the rendering of tones. So I think that proves the point that when you're out, both the fact that the conditions are challenging and difficult actually really made it. It made the whole session really come to life and gave me something I couldn't possibly have expected. And really, I think that's one of the most kind of creatively fulfilling aspects of the whole business is when things happen unexpectedly and you're there to bear witness to them. And in this case, it was the heavy rain and the trees together that worked. Well, this is an area of woodland which I've been to many times, and I find myself always amazed because it's so different at different times of year. And this is no exception, but it's particularly lovely today. This is an area of rough grazing pasture as well as the trees. But I noticed an area that hasn't been grazed further along, and it's got a carpet of bluebells underneath it. And I think it's worth having a closer look. And we're gonna just drop down through here and see if what I had in mind might come together. There's a fascinating difference between this very rough area of ground, the understory here, which still a lot of autumnal leaves on the ground, and yet just on this side of the fence where the sheep have not been, it's a wonderful carpet of fresh grass and bluebells, and that does give a certain kind of special magical quality to it. There's also some not hugely old trees, but ones which have tons and tons of character, so I think there's definitely opportunities here. It's one of those days where the sun is coming and going, and that also creates opportunities, although generally if the sun's out really strongly it's a bit too contrasty, a bit too harsh. But I think that with this dappled light there's definitely a good opportunity here. So if landscape photography is a jigsaw puzzle of space and form, texture, line, shape, colour, light and dark, this is a really, really nice and interesting example of the possibilities. Moving around these trees, they change shape, and at certain points some trees are revealed, some are concealed, and ideally I'm looking for that most distilled, essential solution to what is a compromise of overlaps and reveals and conceals. After spending 10-15 minutes looking, hunting around, trying different heights and angles, I've decided which trees I'm prepared to lose and sacrifice, and still I hope in that process to distill the composition to its essential elements, and then it'll be down to the light at the moment, which might require a little bit more perseverance again. The most important thing to begin with is to have no sky at the top of the frame, which would just be a distraction, no trapped highlights. And apart from that, the main kind of control point in the composition is the tree that's pushing up the hill with that beautiful curve, and then there's a series of other curves, but there's the tree sort of leaning against it, so they're kind of a force field against one another. And then contained within that space are two other trees dancing, and then beyond there's several other trees which are slightly covered, and then there's another tree on the right which echoes the shape of the main protagonist in the foreground right. And the idea is that they should be in this dynamic relationship together. The light's lovely, very soft, and so there's no tonal contrast problems. But one thing that does concern me is that with good depth of field, it comes across as a little bit difficult to make some things out. There's too much detail. So the final consideration from a photographic point of view that I'm thinking of trying is to use a longer exposure, which I can do with a polarizer and probably a stopping filter. And what that will do is allow me to extend the shutter speed so that I can create a softer impression as the wind blows the leaves during the exposure. So one of the joys of looking at trees is that every single one of them has a kind of personality, or they certainly do in ancient woodland and in broadleaf woodland, and this picture looks to me like a sort of struggle between the trees that are climbing up the hill and those that have decided to walk down the hill, and there's a nice sort of echoing patterny quality to it, and it also has some qualities of incident and almost accident, which I'm really keen on compositionally. And I think it's important to remember that, well, life isn't perfect, is it, for any of us, and from time to time it's a struggle, and so I think landscape photography works well when it reflects that struggle, and I do think that the fact that the trees talk to us in that way makes them really, really come alive. There's a couple of little gaps in this composition where you can see through and past to other trees gesturing and shaping the space around them, and that gives it a depth, I think, and that's certainly for me one of the kind of critical goals of landscape photography, is to convey depth and feeling for the space, for nature, for the landscape in general, and that's one way that we connect with it. One thing's absolutely for sure, you never get any photographs unless you go out and experience nature, and so the most important thing is to do it, to be out there whenever you get the opportunity, whatever the weather. It will work for you, I believe, at any rate, and I think that's the way to be, is to somehow connect yourself with the natural world and get out there and be there in the light, in the wind, in the rain, in the sun, whatever it is, and enjoy your photography.